I have been putting off telling this for a long time, not because I am ashamed of it, and not because I think people will call me a liar, though some will. I have been putting it off because every time I sit down to explain what happened on that property in October of 2019, I have to go back to the moment I was standing at the kitchen sink, hands in warm, soapy water, and I looked up through the glass at my wife's face, and I understood in the space of 1 second that something was behind me. That is where the story starts. That is the part I cannot stop seeing when I close my eyes. My name is Wade. I am 47 years old as I am recording this. In October of 2019, I was 44. I'm a part-time electrician by trade, have been since I was 22, and I've spent most of my working life in crawl spaces and attic chases and on bucket trucks in Newton County, Arkansas, on the edge of the Ozark National Forest. I am the kind of man who measures twice and traces the circuit before he assumes the breaker is faulty. I do not jump to conclusions. I do not spook easy. My wife Deb will tell you that. She will tell you that even now, even after what both of us saw, the first thing I wanted to do the next morning was find a rational explanation. The fact that I couldn't find one is the reason I am talking about this at all. We bought the property in 2012, 7 years before this happened. 11 acres off a gravel road about 6 miles east of Boxley Valley. Second property past the cattle gate on the left. The house sits roughly in the center of the lot, and behind it there is maybe 80 feet of open yard before the tree line starts. That's hardwood and cedar mixed in, thick, rolling back up the slope for another 100 yards before it hits the neighbor's old fence line, which nobody has maintained in 20 years. We liked the privacy. We planted a kitchen garden back there the second summer and put up a woodshed about 30 feet from the back door. The yard was Remy's territory. Remy was our shepherd mix. 3 years old at the time, about 65 pounds of dog who knew every inch of that property and had never once shown a moment of unexplained fear in his life. He had seen deer at the tree line. He had seen a black bear cross the upper end of the yard one spring afternoon and barely raised his head from the porch. Remy was not a nervous animal. I want to be clear about where I stood on this kind of thing before that night. I grew up in Carroll County, about 30 miles from where we bought that property. I heard the stories. Old men at the feed store talking about what they had seen in the deep timber above the Buffalo River. Hunters coming in from the national forest with tight mouths and uneasy eyes. I filed those stories in the same drawer I filed stories about people winning the lottery. Possible in the abstract, not my concern. I had spent a large portion of my adult life in the woods and in the dark, running line through attic spaces alone at midnight, doing service work on properties so far back in the hills, I had to ford creek crossings to reach them. I was comfortable in the dark. The dark had never given me a reason not to be. That was where I stood in October of 2019. The day it happened was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had been out at a job site near Jasper all afternoon, rewiring a breaker panel in a house that had been built in 1968 and had not been touched since. And I remember being irritated because the job ran long and I missed supper. Deb had kept a plate warm for me. It was late October, so the light was gone by 6:15. And when I pulled up the drive at about 7:15, the temperature outside was in the low 40s and dropping. I could smell wood smoke from our own chimney, which meant Deb had already started a fire in the living room stove. I changed out of my work clothes, ate my supper at the kitchen table, and then Deb went outside to get one more armload of wood from the woodshed before dark. I told her I would do the dishes. Remy went out with her, which was normal. He always went out with whoever was last out the door in the evening. I was at the sink, water running warm, working through the supper plates. The kitchen window faces the backyard directly. The window is centered above the sink, about 24 inches wide, and from where I stood I had a clear view of the yard all the way to the woodshed, and beyond that and the dark edge of the tree line. The yard light at the corner of the shed threw enough glow to see by. I was not thinking about anything in particular. I was thinking about the breaker panel, honestly, running the circuit in my head, the way I do when I am doing something with my hands that doesn't need my full attention. That is when I looked up and saw Deb's face. She was about 20 feet from the back door, which put her maybe halfway between the door and the woodshed, and she had stopped completely. She was not facing the shed, she was facing the house, facing the window, facing me. The armload of wood was still against her chest, but her arms had gone rigid, holding it tight, the way you hold something when your body has locked up, and you have forgotten you are holding anything at all. Her face was lit from the side by the yard light, and I could read it clearly through the glass. I have known Deb for 22 years, and I have seen her afraid before. But what was on her face in that moment was not the kind of fear that comes from a sudden loud sound or a near miss on the highway. It was the other kind, the kind that is very still and very old, and does not know how to move. She was not looking at me, she was looking at something behind me. I turned around. The kitchen was empty. The light was on over the stove. The fire was going in the next room. Remy's water bowl was on the mat by the door. Nothing was there. I turned back to the window and Deb was already moving toward the house, moving fast. And by the time I got to the back door and opened it, she was on the porch steps, with the wood still locked in her arms. She came inside and I closed the door behind her, and she set the wood down on the floor instead of the rack, and she looked at me with her jaw tight. "Something was right behind you," she said. I asked her what she meant. I asked her what she had seen. She said she did not know. She said it was tall. She said it was standing close to the window, looking in over my shoulder, and that by the time her eyes told her brain what she was looking at, it was already gone. She said it was not a person. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that the distance, the yard light angle, the glass itself, could all conspire to make a shadow or a tree branch read as something it wasn't. I did not say any of that out loud because her face told me she had not seen a tree branch. Instead, I asked if she wanted me to walk the yard. She said no. She said she wanted me to stay inside. I stayed inside. Remy had not come in with her. I realized that about 3 minutes after she came through the door. I went to the back door and opened it and called for him, and he came up the porch steps, but he stopped at the threshold. He would not cross it. He stood there with his front paws on the mat and his body behind the door frame and his ears pinned flat against his skull, and he was looking past me into the yard. Not at anything I could see, just at the yard, at the dark beyond the shed light's reach, and every hair from the back of his neck to the base of his tail was standing up in a ridge. I had owned that dog for 3 years. I had never seen him like that. I reached down and put my hand on his neck, and he flinched, which he had never done. Then he stepped over the threshold and pressed himself against my left leg hard enough to shift my balance, and he did not stop watching the backyard. I told myself it was a coyote. I told myself the scent had drifted down from the tree line and Remy had caught it and Deb had seen a shadow. I told myself those two things were unrelated and both of them were mundane. I almost believed it. I got my work light from the hall closet, the big corded LED bar I use on job sites, and I rigged the extension cord out through the back door and lit up the yard from the porch. Nothing out there in the cone of white light, flat grass, the woodshed, the fence posts along the back line, the tree line beyond them, black and still. I left the work light running and went back inside and locked the door. About an hour later, I went out to look. I want to be honest about that. I went out because leaving the thing unexamined felt worse than facing it, and because I am an electrician, and an electrician's brain does not let a mystery sit on the table without poking at it. I put on my coat and took the flashlight, and I walked the yard in a wide arc, from the back corner of the house to the woodshed, and then along the fence line toward the tree line. The temperature had dropped further, probably high 30s by then, and my breath was coming out in short white puffs. The grass was stiff with cold. I found the brush at the tree line, about 15 feet inside the fence, where the cedar growth starts and the hardwood trunks get thick. There was a section of low scrub that had been pushed flat, not snapped, not broken the way deer bed down and stand up quickly. Pushed flat in a wide radius, maybe 6 feet across, the branches bent downward rather than sideways, like something very heavy had stood there, like weight had come down from above onto a standing position not rolled or laid down. I stood at the edge of it with my flashlight, and I told myself it was a deer, a large buck working a scrape, and that explanation held for about 4 seconds before I registered the smell. I have been around livestock most of my life. I know what a large animal smells like. I know what a dog kennel smells like, and a coyote den, and the inside of a barn in August. This was none of those things. It was musky and wet, and there was something underneath it I could not name, something sharp and organic that sat wrong at the back of my throat, and it was strong enough that I took a step back from the brush instinctively before I had made any conscious decision to move. I told myself it was a bear. Black bears do have a distinct smell, and they do push brush down, though I had never seen one push it down quite like that. I took that explanation and I held on to it, and I walked back to the house. The woods were quiet. I registered that on the walk back, somewhere between the fence line and the back door. No insects. Late October, so the insects were mostly gone anyway. But there had been crickets earlier that evening. I'd heard them when I came in from work. A low, steady rhythm from the tree line. They were gone now. No movement in the branches, though there was enough wind to move branches. No owls. We have a pair of barred owls that work that strip of timber regularly, and I had not heard them. When I got back to the porch, I stopped and just listened. And what I heard was nothing. A flat, heavy nothing. The kind of quiet that is not peaceful but is instead the absence of something that should be there. I stood on the porch with my hand on the door handle and I listened for 30 seconds. And I heard the wind move through the high branches and I heard my own heartbeat. And I heard nothing else. I went inside and told Deb I had found some push-down brush and a smell and that it was probably a bear. She looked at me and said, "A bear was standing at our kitchen window looking in over your shoulder." I did not have an answer for that. If you have seen something yourself, or if someone close to you has, leave a comment. I read them. It helps to know there are other people who have found themselves standing in their own backyard with their rational mind working hard and coming up empty. The next hour was long and strange in the way that waiting is strange when you are not sure what you are waiting for. Deb sat in the living room chair closest to the stove. Remy lay on the rug at her feet, with his chin on her ankle and his eyes on the back wall, the direction of the yard. Every few minutes his ears would move, tracking something outside that I couldn't hear. I sat at the kitchen table with the back door locked and the work light still running out there through the extension cord, and I watched the window. The yard showed me nothing. Flat white light on flat gray grass, the woodshed at its edge, the fence posts in a row, the tree line beyond them an unbroken wall of black. At a little past 9:30, one of the fence posts disappeared. That is the only way I can describe it. I was looking at the back fence line, and then I was looking at a gap where one of the posts should have been. The post was there. I could see the top of it, but the lower 2/3 of it were blocked. Something was standing at the fence on our side between the woodshed and the tree line, and it was blocking the post from view. The work light did not reach that far cleanly. The beams spread and thinned at 40 yards, and what I saw was a shape in the thin light, a shape that was wrong in its proportions, in a way I am still not sure I can explain accurately. The fence posts are 6 feet tall. I put them in myself in 2014. I know their height exactly. Whatever was standing at the fence was taller than the post, not by inches. The top of the post came to roughly what I would estimate as shoulder height or a little above on the shape I was looking at, which put the top of whatever that was at somewhere between 7 and 7.5 feet. I want to be careful about this because it was dark and the light was diffuse, and my depth perception at 40 yards through a window is not perfect. I am not going to tell you I measured it. I am telling you the fence post is 6 feet, and the shape cleared it by a considerable margin, and that when my brain tried to produce a rational explanation for what I was seeing, the explanations it came up with were things like a man on stilts or 2 men stacked, and those explanations did not feel less disturbing than what I was actually afraid I was looking at. It was standing still, not shifting its weight, not turning, not doing anything, just standing at the fence line in the thin light, and what I could make out of its general shape was that it was upright, fully upright, and that its head was large and its shoulders were wide and its arms were at its sides and too long. I registered the arms particularly because when you see a figure at a distance, the arms are what tell you the proportions, and the proportions on this thing were wrong in a way that pulled at something old in the back of my mind, some pre-language piece of wiring that was telling me to get away from the window and not make any sudden movements. I called Deb's name quietly and told her not to come into the kitchen. Then the shape moved. It did not run. It stepped back. One deliberate step, then another. And then it was inside the tree line, and the fence post was whole again, just a fence post in pale work light, and the yard was empty. And I would have told myself I had imagined it, or that I had been primed by the evening to see shapes and shadows, except that at the moment it stepped back into the tree line, Remy made a sound I've never heard a dog make before or since. Not a bark, and not a growl, something flatter than either of those, held low in his chest, a sound that didn't have a question in it at all. I turned off the work light. We sat in the dark, Deb and I, with the fire in the stove, throwing orange light against the living room wall, and neither of us spoke much. Deb made a mug of coffee and didn't drink it. I kept the flashlight in my hand. Remy did not move from his spot at Deb's feet until almost midnight, when he finally put his head down and his eyes closed. Though they did not close completely, he slept with the whites of his eyes showing in narrow slits the whole rest of the night. At around 11, I went to the back door and stepped out onto the porch for 60 seconds with the flashlight. The yard was empty. The cold had deepened and the frost was coming in on the grass. A faint, crystalline glitter in the flashlight beam. The tree line was silent and black. No smell, no sound except the very faint movement of the upper branches. I went back inside. I am going to tell you about the full encounter now, and I am going to be as specific as I can be, because the specific details are what I have been carrying for 5 years, and they are what I owe anyone who is going to sit through this account. At approximately 12:40 in the morning, I heard the woodshed. Not a sound from inside it, but a sound from the side of it. A slow, repeated pressure against the exterior wall boards, the way boards sound when something leans into them and releases. Rhythmic, unhurried, about 3 seconds between each one. I heard it clearly from the kitchen with the window closed. I picked up the work light, plugged in again, and I stood at the window and I turned it on. The thing was standing at the back corner of the property, not at the shed but beyond it, roughly 40 yards out. And it was facing the house, facing me, facing the window. I am going to tell you what the light showed me, and I am not going to reach for words that are bigger than what I saw. It was tall, matching what I had estimated from the fence post, somewhere in the range of 7 feet. Possibly more. It was standing on 2 legs. The stance was not a person's stance. The legs were too far apart, and the knees had a slight forward bend that was wrong. Not the bend of a man shifting his weight, but something more fundamental in the way the whole structure was arranged. The shoulders were very wide. The arms hung lower than they should have. I stared at the arms for a second because my brain would not release the detail, the way the hands, if those were hands, fell well past the mid-thigh line. The torso was thick through the chest, not fat but dense, the way a working animal is dense. No neck I could distinguish clearly. The head sitting low between the shoulders, and the head itself was large and elongated and sat in a position that reminded me of nothing I had a name for. The face was in partial shadow because the work light was not directly overhead. It was angled, and what I could see of the face was a heavy brow line, and below it 2 reflective points, 2 small fixed glints, where the light caught something and bounced back. The way eyes reflect light. Except the spacing of those points was wider than a man's eyes, and they were in a face that was not a man's face. The fur, if that is what it was dark, somewhere between brown and black, not matted but dense, thicker at the shoulders and neck. There was a smell I registered even with the window closed, or perhaps I was remembering the smell from the tree line and my senses had assembled it for context. Either way, it was there. It did not move for the first full minute I stood at that window. It stood at the back corner of my 11 acres, and it looked at the house, and the house looked back through one lit window. And for that full minute, I could not get my legs to move. I am not embarrassed to say that. The flashlight was in my left hand, and the window frame was in my right, and I was not moving. My mind was running through everything it knew and coming up empty. And what filled the space where explanations should have been was a very clear, very simple understanding that I was looking at something I had no frame for, and that whatever it was looking back and it was aware of me in the specific way that a predator is aware of something it has been watching for a while. It did not make a sound I could hear through the glass. It made no threatening motion. What it did was stand there in the light and let me look at it. And that stillness was the most frightening thing about it. Not the height or the arms or the face. The patience. The absolute absence of alarm. It was not afraid of the light. It was not afraid of the house. It was not afraid of me. I stepped back from the window, and as I did, I said out loud, to nobody, to Deb asleep in the next room, or to myself, or to the empty kitchen, I said, "That is not a bear." I turned off the work light. I went to the living room. I sat in the chair next to the stove, and I put the flashlight on the end table, and I stared at the fire, and I didn't go near the kitchen window for the rest of the night. Deb came out of a half sleep when I sat down, and she looked at my face in the firelight, and she did not ask me what I'd seen. She reached across and put her hand on my arm and left it there. Remy was at our feet, still sleeping with those narrow white slits of eyes. We stayed like that until the gray came. First light in late October in Newton County, Arkansas comes in through the east windows quietly. No drama, just a slow replacement of black by gray beginning at the horizon line above the tree line. I watched it happen through the living room window. When I could see the yard clearly enough to be sure it was empty, I stood up. I do not know how to describe the specific quality of being very tired and very awake at the same time. But if you have ever sat through a night waiting for something to happen, you know what the body feels like at the end of it. Flat. The muscles have been holding themselves ready for hours, and now they are spent, and the mind is running clean and slow like water in a creek after the flood drops. I put on my boots and my coat, and I went out the back door into the cold. The frost was on the grass, heavy now, a white skin over everything, and my boots left dark prints in it. The temperature was probably right at 32, maybe a degree below. My breath came out in long, slow columns. I walked to the back fence line, to the corner of the property where I had seen it standing, and I stood there in the cold, gray morning, and I looked at the ground. The frost was disturbed. Not tracks in the precise sense, not a clear-shaped print in soft earth, but a wide, irregular area at the back corner where the frost had been pressed down and fractured, where something large had stood and shifted its weight. The marks stretched for maybe 4 feet in diameter. Beyond the fence line, in the softer earth at the tree line, there were partial impressions in the leaf mat, wide-spaced and deep. The spacing between them, too long for any animal I had a name for. I stood at that fence line for a few minutes looking at those impressions. Then I went inside and I told Deb I was going to get the truck, and we were leaving for her mother's place in Harrison for a couple days. She did not argue. I packed a bag for each of us, put Remy in the back seat of the truck with his blanket, and we were out the driveway by 7:15 in the morning. I remember the gravel under the tires, the way the road looked in the early low light, the cedar trees on either side of the driveway very still in the cold air. I remember looking up at the rear view mirror at the house, getting smaller behind me. I did not feel relieved. I felt like a man who has put a problem down on a table and walked away from it, knowing the problem would be there when he came back. We came back 3 days later. We had to. It was our house. Some things changed after that, and I want to say them plainly, because I think that is what this kind of account owes a listener. I put motion sensor lights on the back of the house, 3 of them covering the full yard from the back door to the fence line. I put them in the week we came back. I run them every night, have since November of 2019, and have not stopped. I checked the fence line and the tree line twice in the first month after it happened, during the day and not alone, and I found nothing more than what I had found that first morning. Remy came back to the property with us, but he would not sleep inside after that. He would come in during the day, would eat inside, would follow Deb through the house in his normal way. But when the dark came, he wanted the porch. We put his bed and his blanket out there, and he slept on the porch through that winter and has slept there every night since, by his own choice. He is 8 years old now and healthy, and that is where he sleeps. I went back out to the tree line in daylight probably 5 or 6 times over the following weeks, and found disturbed ground twice more at different points along the fence line, pressed brush, and the same wide spacing in the leaf mat. I did not find it again after December. Whether that means it moved on or simply stopped leaving sign that I could find, I cannot tell you. Deb did not sleep well for the better part of a year. She would not say she was sleeping badly. She would not describe it in any clinical language. That is not how she talks. What she did was get up in the night and check the window locks, which she had never done before, and she began leaving the kitchen light on when we went to bed. She's not turned that kitchen light off since October of 2019. I do not mention that as a complaint. I sleep better knowing the light is on. I went to a feed store in Jasper about 2 weeks after it happened and got talking with a man named Carl Briggs, who has a property 2 ridges over from ours and has run that land his whole life. I did not ask him directly. I asked him around the edges, asked if he had noticed any unusual activity in the timber along the creek drainage, asked if he had lost any livestock to predators in the fall. He looked at me for a moment over the counter and he said, "Depends on the kind of predator you're asking about." He let that sit there. Then he said, "There are things in this timber that have been in this timber longer than we have." He did not say more than that, and I did not press him, and we talked about something else. But I have thought about that sentence a great deal since then. I have not reported this to anyone official. The county sheriff's office is not a venue for this kind of conversation, and I am not interested in that particular experience. I have not joined any groups or forums about it. I am not here to tell you what I think it was. I do not know what it was. I know what it was not. I have looked at photographs of every large North American predator I can find, and I have read what I can find about reported encounters in the Ozarks, and I have not found anything that fully accounts for what I saw in the beam of that work light at 12:40 in the morning in the back corner of my 11 acres. That is where my knowledge ends and where the question begins. And I am comfortable with that boundary in a way that I was not comfortable with it before that night. I am still in the house. We both are. I want to say that because I think it matters. We did not sell the property, did not move, did not let this take the life we had built on that land. I still run line in the National Forest for electrical jobs. I still go into those woods, though I go differently now. I go with more attention and more humility and a clearer understanding that the things I learned in 20 years of working in the dark do not constitute a complete picture of what the dark contains. I said I had been putting this off for a long time. Part of the reason is that telling it out loud means finishing the sentence that I have been leaving incomplete for 5 years. The sentence that starts with "I saw something" and ends with an admission that I cannot categorize what it was. That sentence sits differently now than it sat before I started recording this. Lighter in some way, or maybe just settled. The morning after it happened, while I was packing the bags to go to Deb's mother's house, Deb sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pencil, and she drew what she had seen through the window. She drew what she had looked at over my shoulder for those few seconds before it was gone. I didn't see her do it. I found the page when I came back through the kitchen, and she put her hand over it, not to hide it from me, but in a reflex way, the way you cover something private before you have decided whether or not to share it. Then she moved her hand and let me look. She is not an artist. The drawing is simple. 2 vertical lines suggesting the window frame, my own back and shoulders in rough outline at the bottom of the frame, and above and behind me a shape, the general mass of something large and upright, a heavy head set low between wide shoulders, long arms at the sides. Below the sketch, she had written 3 words in her ordinary handwriting. I did not get a good look at the 3 words because she folded the page before I could read them clearly, folded it, and put it in the top drawer of the kitchen cart beside the refrigerator, where she keeps the takeout menus and the spare batteries and the notepad she jots grocery lists on. That notepad is still in that drawer. She has not thrown it away, and neither have I. Neither of us has said anything about it. It is just there, a folded piece of paper in a kitchen drawer, in a house on 11 acres in Newton County, Arkansas, and it will likely be there for as long as we are in this house. I do not need to open it to remember what she saw. I was standing right there.